this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Lowe's knows Sundays are for football. So tackle your home improvement projects by Saturday and earn your Sunday with great deals on LG and Bosch appliances, select Bounty and Swiffer cleaning products, and more. Then once your to-do list is done, get ready to kick back, relax, and enjoy the game. Shop in-store or online now and earn your Sunday with help from Lowe's, official partner of the NFL.
This is Tab Ramos from Inside American Soccer, and this summer, Topgolf is turning into the ultimate soccer destination. They've got a new soccer-themed game you can play with your group, exclusive food and drink items. They've even installed full-size soccer goals so you can try to hit golf balls right into the net. And every match all summer long will be on throughout the venue. And if you want to keep the fun going all summer, you can get the Topgolf Summer Fun Pass, which lets you play every single day and bring up to 5 guests every visit. Get yours now at topgolf.com/funpass.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zachariason.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zachariason, and this episode 1105 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. A few weeks ago, I introduced a new metric to you guys called Market Score. It's something that Brandon Gadula and we've been working on for a couple of months, and it felt like it was in the right place to share with you. As I mentioned on that episode, it was still a work in progress. We still had some things that we wanted to add and change, though we didn't know how major those changes would be. Turns out, we needed some relatively big changes. After that episode was published, I received a lot of messages of confusion from people. Listeners didn't quite get what we were trying to do, and that's a problem. One of the hardest parts of my job is being able to communicate ideas that aren't always easy to communicate, and I want to do a better job with that when it comes to Market Score. So Brandon and I went back into the lab, and we've emerged with a different type of way to talk about Market Score. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'll be able to provide more concrete examples of who the metric likes and dislikes here in 2026. Before getting into that though, as a reminder, all of this Market Score stuff, along with game theory talk, strategy talk, rankings and tiers, and more, are all in this year's Late Round Draft Guide. That's available for pre-order right now on the new lateround.com. Or you can become an all-access member on the site, where you also get free access to the draft guide and the prospect guide, as well as just becoming a member. It's all up to you, but to learn more, check out lateround.com. Now, if you didn't listen to the Market Score episode from a few weeks ago, no worries. You don't need to go back and listen to it. In fact, you might be more confused if you do that. Basically, the idea of Market Score stems from the ZAP model. As you guys know by now, the ZAP model is my prospect model that looks at different collegiate inputs to determine how well a player is going to perform in fantasy football across the first 3 years of his NFL career. A central piece of that model is draft capital, or where a player gets selected in the NFL draft. Draft capital captures a lot of things that we should care about for fantasy purposes, and it's pretty predictive when looking at how well a player performs in the NFL. No surprise there. The higher a player gets drafted, generally speaking, the better he's going to perform in fantasy. When I sat back and thought about it, I've realized that I've kind of been doing the exact same thing as the ZAP model, but for season-long leagues for years. I just didn't have a model for it. Let me explain. If you've read previous iterations of the Late Round Draft Guide, or even if you've just listened to this podcast, then you've read all of my analysis on average draft position expectation, or how many points we'd expect a player to score at a particular ADP. Essentially, when you do some regression analysis, you can find the number of points per game you'd anticipate a player to score based on where he's drafted. A wide receiver picked 50th overall might be projected to score 13 PPR points per game, all based on history. Someone 70th overall might be at like 11. And that's just based on what's happened historically. So right now, here in 2026, based on current ADP, we can estimate a player's PPR points per game output. It's a way to use the market in order to get a general understanding of how many points per game a player might score. So we have average draft position for season-long leagues, then we have draft capital for prospecting purposes. Those are both market values. For season-long leagues, ADP is telling us what the general fantasy football market thinks about a player. For the NFL draft and the NFL itself, Draft capital is telling us what the NFL thinks about a player. Now, as we know, the ZAP model then takes that draft capital input and it finds a score for a prospect based on additional inputs like adjusted total yards per team play or breakout score. For market score, we're going to do the exact same thing. But instead of looking at collegiate metrics, we'll be looking at previous season numbers, aside from rookies, where we will actually lean on some of those college metrics. Market score isn't going to show you how many points above or below expected you should expect a player to perform. We ran into some issues when describing market score that way, because expected points per game and relating back to expected points per game was kind of confusing people. Instead, we're quite literally going to be looking at market score the same way we look at the ZAP model, on a scale from 0 to 100. Just like the ZAP model, we can do some cool things with this, like showing how many points per game we'd expect the player to score given his market score, or telling you what overall ADP we'd give the player to break even, essentially telling you where he probably should be drafted. We can find player comps too, which is one of my favorite ways to use this metric. And this is just based off of a player's current ADP and some previous season metrics that give that ADP more signal. You can honestly think about market score as a formulaic way to rank players. Now, I won't be ranking my players that way, but market score will be part of my process when I do rank players. Now, something we ran into in developing this metric is just how scattered late round picks are. There's almost no correlation between ADP and actual points per game for late round selections. So using a formula might not be very helpful for those players. With that being said, late round quarterbacks and late round tight ends, they're very important to the game of fantasy football because quarterbacks and tight ends, they're low in demand positions. We can't just ignore them. We decided that the players who would receive market scores would be any quarterback or tight end drafted in the top 180, which is the top 15 rounds of a 12-team league. For running backs and wide receivers, where far more of them are drafted early, we cap things at pick 120 overall. So if a player falls out of those ranges, he will not have a market score. So non-dart throw players get scores between 0 and 100. A score of like 3 doesn't mean the player is undraftable like it does with the ZAP model. Because remember, we're dealing with top 10 round picks for running backs and wide receivers. With that being said, we can definitely say, hey, historically, players with a score of 3 have done X, Y, Z in PPR points per game. In essence, market score is giving us more context for player evaluation, and it's leveraging the market to do so. That's really what this comes down to. And since we reformatted everything, including some of the inputs in the model, let's talk about what market score is saying here in 2026. I can look at market score right now and tell you who it's generally higher or lower on this year. I'll give you one player it's higher or lower on versus the market at quarterback and tight end, and then 2 of them at running back and wide receiver. And we'll talk about some player comps to really help wrap your head around what's going on here. At quarterback, market score is very high on Jalen Hurts. In fact, Hurts has the second highest market score at the moment, barely ahead of Lamar Jackson. His score is 71.8, which gives him honestly about a 50% chance to score 20 or more points per game this year. Josh Allen, by the way, he's at a score of 100, given what he did last year and where he's being drafted this year. But Jalen Hurts looks like one of the bigger values according to the metric right now. And I want to reiterate a couple of things here. First, this score can and will change. Average draft position is the baseline of this metric. So if a player's ADP increases, that's telling us that there's something more to be desired about that player's profile, because the market wants him more. So his market score is going to get better. Second, please don't think this is how I'm ranking players. I do not have Jalen Hurts as my QB2, but I do think it's an interesting way to be a little bit more objective with our processes, to ask more questions and to try not to be too high or too low on certain players. Really, this is the exact same way that I talked about the ZAP model. Jalen Hurts has some really interesting comps though. The way comps are created for market score is by looking at a player's market score, obviously, but also his overall ADP, his positional rank, and then his career year. Those are all weighed based on importance. So career year gets less importance for the similarity score than some of the other metrics do. Now, admittedly, Jalen Hurts doesn't have a ton of super close comps. His closest one has a similarity score of 82.3. A lot of players have multiple guys above 90. But that top comp for Jalen Hurts is unfortunately Kyler Murray from 2 years ago, which honestly, pretty fair. I was high on Murray that year, as was the market. It's a mobile quarterback who was in year 6 of his NFL career, and he had almost identical overall ADP. Murray scored about 17 standard fantasy points per game that year. That was a huge bummer. So it's a little scary for Hurts. But within this 10-player comp sample, we also get multiple 20-plus point per game players like Joe Burrow in 2024, Cam Newton in 2018, Drew Brees in 2018, Russell Wilson in 2017, and Deshaun Watson in 2020. In total, it's a pretty good outcome for Jalen Hurts. Now, on the flip side, Market Score still really does not like Matthew Stafford, like far more than I do. But Stafford's the QB 12 according to the ADP that we're using right now, and Market Score has him as a low-end QB 2. That's definitely not where I'd rank him, like I said. But it's seeing the touchdown rate regression that I've been talking about on the show, which is something the market usually doesn't factor in enough. It actually only gives him, based on historical results, about an 11% chance to score 18 or more points per game this year, which again, I don't subjectively agree with. And the model is not going to be perfect. To me, it's just a way of saying that Market Score is not a big fan of Matthew Stafford. And funny enough, Matthew Stafford's top 2 comps are also Matthew Stafford. It's the 2022 season where he scored just 12 points per game, and then his 2020 season where he was at about 16. One thing I'll say about Stafford, though, is that the comps really don't know exactly what to do with him. His top one has a 72.6 similarity. That's not high at all. That's probably one of the things that I'd hold on to if I were really into Stafford this year. Now, moving on to tight end, Market Score is literally obsessed with Brock Bowers. Like, it thinks that he should comfortably be a first-round pick. It's got a pretty big gap between Bowers and Trey McBride, too. Tight end looks at a lot of factors in the model, and one of them is wide receiver competition score. That's a huge reason that Bowers is looked at so favorably. We know the wide receivers on that Raiders team, they're lacking in a big way, and that score is driven by the ADPs of those players. But like, you look at Bowers' comps, and they're amazing. His top one is 2025 Trey McBride. We know how that worked out. Almost 19 PPR points per game and a league-winning type pick. McBride had a slightly lower ADP, but he had a perfect Market Score, which is what we're looking at with Bowers right now. And it pains me to say this, but Colston Loveland is not beloved by Market Score. Honestly, the Bears pass catchers, they're iffy in general according to this metric. And it's because of the competition factor, which I think deep down, that's everyone's concern in some way, right? That instead of just 1 or 2 of these players emerging, all 3 of them, Loveland, Luther Burden, Rome Odunze, each of them have pretty good seasons, but they're not able to totally live up to ADP. I'm the kind of fantasy manager who wants to bet on some of these players to emerge, because that's where ceiling outcomes could really hit. But I do think Loveland's 49.1 score, which is 1 point below Tyler Warren's right now, it's reflecting that. It's a way for us to stay grounded with our evaluation, even if we don't blindly follow that score. Now let's go to running back. Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, and Christian McCaffrey, they all look like smashes according to Market Score. But then there's also Ashton Jeanty. He's got the 4th best Market Score among all running backs. He's looked at as the RB4, partially because he's young, he's a stud, and he had volume last year. But also because of what I said with Bowers. There's opportunity for him to be the central piece of this offense, and Market Score is recognizing that. Jeanty's top comp is Eddie Lacy in 2014, his second year in the league, where he scored 17 PPR points per game. People forget that Lacy was actually really valuable for the first 2 seasons of his career in fantasy football. And then Jeanty's other top comp, which is a similarity score of 90, is Ezekiel Elliott in 2017. Zeke scored almost 21 PPR points per game that year, his second year in the NFL. There's a very real chance I'll be even higher on Jeanty after digging into his Market Score. Another player to call out favorably is Omarion Hampton. Market Score loves these year 2 backs, Hampton being one of them. Hampton has a lot of close Market Score comps, like Dalvin Cook in 2018 when he scored just 14 PPR points per game. There's also Kareem Hunt in 2018 as a second-year player when he posted 21. And then he gets some Miles Sanders, Gio Bernard, Christian McCaffrey, and Jahmyr Gibbs all in their second seasons too. So there are some good upside comps, but even a player like Sanders, he's not a tremendous talent, but he still gave us RB2 numbers. I think the comps for Hampton tell a story that his floor isn't as scary as you might think, but there's really a fun ceiling. Now, on the flip side at running back, I want to first call out that the first iteration seemed to really like Kyle Monangai and Blake Corum, the first iteration of Market Score. This one doesn't. Things were changing the inputs. I just want to call that out and correct myself. But Market Score is not the biggest fan either of Jadarian Price. He's got a score of 24.3, which is more in line with someone like Ramondre Stevenson or Kenneth Gainwell than it is Bashal Tutin or Quinshon Judkins, which is where he goes around. There's some market-related trends that don't mind Jadarian Price. But for rookies in Market Score, the ZAP model naturally is a big input. And while Price wasn't terrible within the ZAP model thanks to teammate score, he definitely wasn't great. Price's top comp in Market Score is another rookie in Kerryon Johnson, who actually wasn't that bad at 13.9 PPR points per game. But then you get Bishop Sankey, J.K. Dobbins, T.J. Yeldon. He doesn't have any true ceiling outcomes among the top 10 on his comp list. More of like solid RB2s as a high-end outcome, which is to be expected as a rookie. But that does say that he might be a little bit overvalued. Tony Pollard's the other player to call out here. His Market Score is 18.5, which is close to Rico Dowdle and not that far away from like Rachaad White, who's going 30 picks later. Pollard's top comps are legitimately frightening. They're older backs who are still holding on to decent ADPs, but they failed to reach even 10 PPR points per game in that given season. Nick Chubb in 2024, Latavius Murray in 2019, Devin Singletary in 2024, Maurice Jones-Drew in 2014. He eventually gets a good comp in Fred Jackson back in 2014 and David Montgomery in 2023. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. Tony Pollard scares me this year. I know he doesn't have the toughest competition in the world, but I think there's plenty of variance with his profile. Like he should be one tier down versus going around players like Ramondre Stevenson and Jaylen Warren. So that's running back. Let's finish things up with wide receiver. Market Score really likes the top of the position this year. Nico Collins is probably one to call out specifically because his score of 74.3 is actually higher than Drake London's, which is 67.5. Nico's top comp is 2014's Jordy Nelson, where he scored 19.6 PPR points per game. 3 of his top 4 comps hit 17.5 PPR points per game. It's a really good spot for Nico overall. A little bit further down the list, I've had a really hard time ranking like the round 3 to round 5 wide receivers this year because I just really like all of them. But I've got to say, Market Score likes Tetairoa McMillan more than I expected. Not that I think he's a questionable talent at all. Anything but. The dude is a stud. The situation is just very scary given how little they throw the ball and how strong Bryce Young has been as a passer. But T-Mac, friend of the show by the way, T-Mac has a score of 62.8, which is slightly ahead of Emeka Egbuka. You could throw him in the exact same bucket. And because these comps are looking at Market Score, overall ADP, positional rank, and career year, both T-Mac and Egbuka share a lot of the same comps. They basically share identical comps. And that includes their top one, which is year 2 Juju Smith-Schuster. That year, Juju scored 17.6 PPR points per game. Now, if you look at the bad side at wide receiver, I think the most obvious call out is Mike Evans. I don't hate Mike Evans as much as Market Score does, mostly because I think the fit in San Francisco could make him this year's Davante Adams, with maybe even more yardage upside. But I definitely see the downside, which is why I'm not overweight on Evans right now in best ball. Evans has a Market Score of 29.8. That's more in line with like Quentin Johnston. Like it's very low for where Evans generally goes. Some of you are going to hate hearing this, but his top comp and Market Score by far is Allen Robinson's 2022. That was the year that Robinson changed teams just like Evans did, and he went to the Rams. And he was just a massive, massive bust. Now, I really don't think that we're going to see that outcome for Mike Evans. And we did get a couple of good top 10 comps for Evans, like Emmanuel Sanders in 2018. But it just goes to show how volatile this situation is, given where you're drafting him. And then the last player I'm going to call out is Matthew Golden. I bought into Golden in best ball because his cost is pretty cheap. But even at that price tag, which is closer to wide receiver 50, 117th overall according to the ADP that we're looking at for Market Score, at that price tag, he's got a Market Score of 1. Largely because he didn't do anything last year. And he's obviously got competition based on ADP and Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, and Tucker Kraft. Golden's top comp by far is Sky Moore's year 2. There was some hope for more coming off of a bad rookie season, but it just didn't develop. If you want a more optimistic look for Matthew Golden, it's Jameson Williams in 2024 as a third-year player, maybe Michael Gallup in 2019 as a year 2 player. But neither of those guys were league winners. And they're the only 2 players in Matthew Golden's top 10 comp list who scored more than 9 PPR points per game. I'm not quite there with Golden, but it should bring you back to earth a bit if you're buying heavily. Now, like I said, all of this is just another tool to help us get closer to the right answers. You don't have to blindly agree. Similarly, you don't have to blindly agree with the ZAP model and what that says. Context is always key. But this version of Market Score, the one that we're using moving forward, it's more predictive than average draft position, and it should be helpful on our journey to winning a fantasy title. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back on Wednesday on the YouTube channel with David Kitchen for the Late Round Fantasy Football Show. And then this week, it's a mailbag week. So I got a mailbag episode for you dropping on Friday. I'll talk to you guys then.
Paramount Plus is now the home of all your BET favorites.
What? Yes!
With all new episodes of Tyler Perry's Divorce Sisters.
You've always liked a little drama.
Plus a whole new world of movies like Gladiator 2.
Now I will control an empire.
Original series like The Chi.
Just make sure we protect each other.
And live sports like UFC.
Welcome to the history books!
New home, same family. Your BET favorites are now on Paramount Plus. Subscribe now.
Running a business shouldn't feel like surviving a software group project. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales. And somehow, none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in, an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together. From sales and accounting to inventory and marketing, all in one powerful platform. No messy integrations, no bouncing between tabs. And best of all, no spreadsheets. Stop managing software and start managing your business with one unified system. Try for free today at odoo.com/iHeartRadio. That's ODOOO.com/iHeartRadio.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.